Happy Friday. Thanks for joining us. Igor and Anu, we are the owners of Vinousreverie Wine Merchant out in Walnut Creek, California. And you're watching the show for the adventurous wine drinker. So thanks for joining us. Tonight we are tasting and reviewing a really cool wine, Paul Prieur's Sancerre. So let me show off the bottle. And yeah, let's talk about this wine, Igor.
Well,
what is a Sancerre? Yeah, what is it?
Not Sauvignon Blanc. Or is it?
Yeah, stroke that goatee real nice. Okay.
I'll tell you a little anecdote. So when I opened the shop, maybe within the first couple of months, I had some customers come in, and they were asking, do you have Sancerre? And I'm like, at that point, I didn't have a Sancerre in the shop, so I'm like, I don't have Sancerre, but I have a Sauvignon Blanc from a surrounding village. Mm-hmm. And the response was, I don't want Sauvignon Blanc, I want Sancerre. Mm-hmm. So it's a...
The implication was she had no idea what even a Sancerre really was.
Right. So all white Sancerre is Sauvignon Blanc. Right. And it's funny how it's a good anecdote because how branded Sancerre is. The people associate it as a brand, and Chablis is kind of the same way.
Yes.
People don't know that Chablis. Some casual wine drinkers don't know that Chablis is Chardonnay.
Right.
They think Chablis is its own grape. Yes. The same thing as Sancerre is its own grape. No, Chablis is a Chardonnay, Sancerre is a Sauvignon Blanc. Yes. White Sancerre.
Yes.
So
we have some,
Yeah. So that was like a funny anecdote about how important branding is, and we'll talk a little bit different aspects of branding and how it just kind of simplifies the wine world, but in many ways makes it less interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. So Sauvignon Blanc, it's a high acidity grape, herbaceous, like I said, high acids, gooseberry, a lot of minerality. That's a lot of the flavor profiles from this grape. Mm-hmm. In fact, some of the herbaceousness, a lot of wine professionals have pointed out that it has similarities to Cabernet Sauvignon.
Okay.
And actually, in the late 90s, they did like a DNA research, and they found out that Cabernet Sauvignon is actually a progeny of Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Franc, which is the great red grape of the Loire Valley. Okay. So we mentioned Sancerre is within the greater Loire region in western France.
Okay, so should I pull up a map?
Yes. Yeah.
Let me pull up a map so you guys can see better. Where it is.
DNA has also proven that...
sideways.
That's all right.
Let's see if we can tilt it. Nope, wrong way.
That's us tilted.
Well,
all right, guys. So this is sideways, but if you could look at the bottom, whether you can see like a little green circle, so that would be the eastern part of the Loire Valley, and it's actually called the Upper Loire. And Sancerre is right there. It's circled right there. So it's the most it's the most famous region in there. So and the one interesting thing about that region is that right next to it, it would be kind of slightly upper left to you. There's a little village called Ménétal-Salon. Are you familiar?
That I'm not.
And that's exactly how we started out this conversation is the brand of Sancerre.
Right. So that's a village right near.
Right here, and they also specialize in Sauvignon Blanc.
Okay.
But it doesn't have the reputation of Sancerre. And frequently the pricing is not on the same level as Sancerre. Okay. Because Sancerre is branded. And the reason I was pointing it out for you is because you were familiar with Sancerre.
Yes.
But not with that region. No. And by the fact that you're familiar with that region, that's already why the price points is higher.
Because it's driving up demand.
Because it's branded, it's familiar to people, it's driving up the price. And there's Walter Speller. He's a really great specialist of Italian wine. He contributes articles to JensenRobinson.com. Mm-hmm. And recently he wrote an article about Brunello's, the 2016 vintage. And 2016 vintage is considered a great vintage. And he used a great phrase. He said that a rising tide lifts all boats.
I don't know what that means. So you're going to have to explain.
Yeah, so he used it in the context of quality. So what he was implying with that quote is he said, the vintage is so great that houses, the wineries that typically make excellent wines would make spectacular wines in that vintage.
Okay,
and those who make good wines would make great wines in the vintage.
Okay.
So that's why it was so great. Everything would go up.
Right.
But I kind of, when I read it, I'm like, man, that's an excellent way to interpret the pricing in the wine world. So he was talking about quality, but I'll reinterpret it as pricing.
Okay.
So you use Sancerre and Ménetal Salon, both villages in the Upper Loire, both produce Sauvignon Blanc. Mm-hmm. Sancerre is more familiar to the consumer.
Right.
So I could make let's just say, for the sake of the argument, that at its best, Sauvignon Blanc is greater in Sancerre than it is in Ménetal Salon.
Okay.
But because those wines are so popular, they demand high price points. But because consumer knows about Sancerre, mediocre wines in Sancerre start demanding higher price points.
Right, because there's a demand, so there's more production. So the more production is not necessarily of the best Sancerre. There's a lot of mediocre Sancerre being made.
Exactly. They go into soils that don't produce excellent wines. So what you get in a situation like that is an excellent Ménetal Salon might not be as great as an excellent Sancerre, but it sure is way better than a mediocre Sancerre. And it's definitely much cheaper.
Right. And you're more likely, unless you really know what you're picking. I mean, this wine is excellent, but you're more likely to end up with mediocre Sancerres.
And I think because branding is easier to sell to consumer, that's one of the reasons I strongly feel that consumers just drink mediocre wines because of branding and because kind of lack of knowledge. And it helps, those who are making the brands. And we've talked about it before, like it goes with all the famous, Burgundies have the same issue, Bordeaux has the same issue, Napa has the same issue. All the classic regions that a casual consumer is familiar with, they would have those issues. So frequently, great examples from the lesser regions are just about always better than more expensive mediocre examples from the more famous neighboring region.
Right.
So and Sancerre is one of these. But I think this Sancerre is it's pretty great. So it's actually this is a 2019 vintage, and I love to use Jancis Robinson as kind of the benchmark. So in our database for the 2019 vintage, only 2 Sancerres got 17 points or higher. Okay. And this was one of them.
Yeah, obviously one of them. Awesome.
Paul Prieur, Sancerre. Yes. And I think, when we talk about value within Sancerre, from my observations, I would say if it's between $27 and $30 and it gets like 92 points, like these got 17 points, to me, if I translate it to a 100-point system, it's like 92 points. That's a great value.
Right.
That's a great
price point to
Yes, that's a great value for a Sancerre.
Yes.
Frequently you have to go to 30 to 35, but like few excellent examples, we're talking about climbing into like $70, $80, $90 range. So we're talking about double the price of this.
Okay.
And there's no quality Sancerre below $20 price point. The way we just explained.
You can't find it.
You can't find it.
It's not there.
Yeah, I mean, you might find Sancerres, like you go to Trader Joe's, like, oh, look, a Sancerre for $16. What was he talking about? Like, well, yeah, it's $16. It's just, not a 92-point Sancerre.
Yeah, you're not having the best example of Sancerre. Yeah.
Exactly, okay. Yeah. So yeah, that's like, kind of the fun part of that. So... so I don't know. Should we go to try to taste this?
Yeah, let's go ahead and taste this wine. So we poured it earlier, and I did taste it right before the show because I wanted to get a feel for it. And actually, a bug just flew into my wine, so now I'm not going to drink it.
You want to drink mine?
That's okay.
There's no bugs in
it. Are they in there? No. Well, I had it before, so I know what it tastes like. It's well, I said it was grapefruit, gooseberry, and chamomile, wet rock, and
I want to taste it now.
Oh, sorry. I just took the glass and I'm not having any. But yeah, it's delicious. And these are some hallmark tasting notes of these Sancerre wines. They have these kind of hallmark chamomile flint flavor. And it's really interesting. The kind of flint smokiness at the end is really fun.
Well, it's interesting. Let me intervene a little bit. So a little bit about the Prieur family is they've been making wine for like 11 generations. So this goes back some time. And this particular wine, so Sancerre has 3 types of soils. There's okay.
Did you lose them? What are the type of soils?
Yes. So there's the clay and limestone soils. There's all limestone soils, and then there's flint and silex soils.
Silex. Okay, so that's.
And they produce that flinty character that you're talking about, like gun smoke.
Yes.
That's a particular expression of that particular soil.
Okay.
So this wine is a combination of all 3 soils. So about 30% of, a third of each of the grapes were picked from 3 different soils. That's why you have a little bit expression of that flintiness.
Yes.
Because we had 100% silex soils, and it's more pronounced. Here it's not as pronounced because it's blended in with the other soils.
Okay, very cool. I'm glad you brought that up, yeah.
But minerality, when you smell that thing, where's, California, for example, or New Zealand, the other regions that produce, Sauvignon Blanc, fruit jumps out. But here on the nose, minerality jumps out.
Yeah, it's very different. That's the perfect way. Yes. Minerality versus fruit. And I think, this is very interesting kind of tasting notes. It's not just, fruit. So and I like this wine. But mostly I just really love reading Tamlin Curran's reviews. So she's a writer for Jancis Robinson.
The one who gave it 17 points.
Yes, but I have to read what she wrote about this wine. She said, "It is taut with athletic muscle and curved into poetry, art, and science in a glass." I mean, that's... Whenever she writes her reviews about wine, I'm like, it's so
I have
amazing.
to taste it, right?
Yeah,
she's such a
lovely writer, yeah.
Yes. But it's it's a funny transition because art and science that's actually I've started recently came across, for example, Wine Enthusiasts a couple of weeks ago. They did a podcast whether wine is art, and they were kind of discussing on it. They were kind of humming and hawing on it a lot of the times. There wasn't a commitment, but I think in the end they kind of thought it wasn't art.
Okay, perhaps.
Perhaps, yes.
Okay.
And it kind of reminds me the great French impressionist filmmaker Jean Renoir. He's the son of a great painter, impressionist painter.
I think more people are familiar with the painter, but he's one of your favorite filmmakers.
Yes. So Auguste Renoir is his father, the famous painter. So he was saying that it's not only artists and not only painters or filmmakers or sculptors. He was saying like bakers, for example, are artisan too.
Crafts, like if you may have a craft that you're an artist.
Yes, and a lot of these artisan bread, artisan wines. We talk about artisan wines all the time too. So he kind of thought that art is kind of a wider range than just for artists, quote unquote.
Well, Jancis Robinson, she actually wrote an article kind of musing about that as well. She, I guess in 2011, she wrote a master thesis article or whatever talking about is wine an art or science. And at that time, she was a little neutral about that response. But now she says that, wine is art, and that even though science has contributing factor to it. And she kind of listed out some, important aspects of how science has influenced winemaking today. For example, Jean-Antoine Chaptal in the 18th century, he came up with the whole, the concept of adding sugar to increase alcohol.
Yes.
Although I'm not sure that that's a scientific advancement, but...
California Napa cabs love it, yeah.
Yeah, they paid a lot of attention. Yeah. But and then Louis Pasteur, he... discovered fermentation and how that's important to the stability of wine. So, there are all these scientific advancements that are important in, making wine. But ultimately, winemaking is not just, it's not just a chemical equation. It's more of a craft that has more to do with all of the plethora of decisions you make. Terroir, when to pick the grape, to... And we talked about this a little bit in our last show when we were talking about natural wines, because... a lot of craft and natural winemakers, they use indigenous yeast versus commercial yeast, which is lab grown. And lab grown yeast produces very predictable flavors in the wine. So if you want a specific flavor, you just pick a specific lab grown yeast versus indigenous yeast that kind of becomes interpretive. It's hard to predict, what the reaction will be which to me is kind of a little bit like art.
Yes.
You know, and I think there's that obviously brings up another concept that not all paintings are art.
Yeah.
You know, so therefore not all wine is art. I mean, some is produced for production.
Yes.
Versus, you know, there are all these kind of small mom and pop, or in this case, 11 generation. This particular winery, there's 11 generations of winemakers in this family. So for them, it's a legacy, it's a craft, it's a desire to make, you know, to create this wine that I think is what makes it art versus not.
Well, you know, a bunch of cool points on it. You know, the first thing you talked about is you know, the family aspect and tradition. And actually, the show that I do with Kevin Wank, everything you ever wanted to know about
I've
wine.
heard of this, yes.
But we're afraid to ask. We actually had a dedicated show discussing European, a lot of small production European family-owned wineries versus the big production California wines, and the motivation behind it.
Right.
You know, like a profit versus, you know, keeping tradition. Yeah, everybody wants to make a living. You know,
right. Yeah.
We're not saying that there, you know, nobody's selling it for free. All these wines, but there's you know, different things between, like you said, manufacturing, cutting down the cost, try to increase the price, and get the profit, versus try to you know, maintain tradition and improve with new advancements to make the wine better.
Yeah.
So. But you know, the interesting thing you were talking about, it is art, and a lot of people who are kind of into wine, when you listen to them, they like particular winemakers, and the way they talk about them, it's like it's art. It's like, oh, he's experimenting with this. You know, whatever that is, you know, with the soils, with the yeast, with the, you know, oak, not oak. A lot of the winemakers right now are putting wine in cement, in amphora, you know, those huge jars. You know, the experiment is like, oh, it's a new thing, amphora. But, you know, the Georgians were doing that 8,000 years ago, you know.
Right.
So it's relative. And you know, it's funny, I frequently read terms like, from Jessis Robinson, which is like, she frequently uses that term, technically correct. And when she uses the term technically correct, it's not the most
it's not a
endorsing.
Yeah, it's not
she's not exactly endorsing full out the winery.
Well, yeah, it's like in music, like you know, I play the piano. Are you technically correct, or that's not enough to be technically correct when you're playing a song? So.
Well, you know, it's funny because I'm a big film buff, and I think the correlation between fine wine and you know, like cinema is ending. I think we might have like a whole show dedicated to that, but like
not now.
No, there's, you know, there's like Hollywood films versus artsy European films.
Right.
You know, like stupid action versus pretentiousness. You know, there all these factors you could correlate to wine the same way.
Yes. Absolutely. Casual wine versus pretentious wine. Or,
And you know, the other thing is the psychology of a consumer. I think that's a fascinating thing. How you know, we were talking about brand. We actually wrote an article about this. How brand trumps quality,
right?
And we were discussing kind of this exact concept. How I used the example of Zinfandel versus Mencia grape. So when a consumer sees a 92-point Zinfandel versus 90-point Zinfandel, and the prices are the same, he would choose the 92-point Zinfandel, which is like a rational choice, right? But let's say if he sees like 92-point Mencia, a grape that he's not familiar with, versus a 90-point Zinfandel, and the price point once again is the same, they would go towards the Zinfandel because they're familiar with the Zinfandel, and suddenly the reviewers.
Perspective doesn't matter, right?
Doesn't matter. Like, they kind of get scared and they go for what they know.
Right.
And to me, this is just another example of drinking mediocrity.
Right.
You know, like I could go into different examples, and I have this information just from seeing what people buy, from reading statistics on which wines sell the most. All roads lead to mediocrity. It's uncanny almost.
Except the road to our store. Well, I mean, that's the whole motto of our store. For the adventurous wine drinker, it's kind of like counter branding. You know, try something different. I mean, this Sancerre is great, but we have wines from surrounding regions, which are spectacular.
Salon,
it's worthy to try and different, you know.
It's cheaper than this Sancerre, but to me, this Sancerre falls in a great value category, and it's not cheap. You know, $30 is not like a cheap one. Just as a context, an average bottle of the consumer buys is between, I think, $15 to $18. So this would be on the higher end. But like we were saying, if you want to be drinking quality Sancerre at a good price point, this is jumps in. That's why I brought it in. You know, there are more highly rated Sancerres that are $80. But I'm like, you know what? It's more highly rated, but I think it's kind of in a range that's, you know, kind of a little too premium. To me, this is a value. That's not a value. That's a really good wine, but it's not value in my book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So.
All right. Well, anything that we missed? I think we went on several tangents, but that was fun.
It was fun. Yeah. Okay. I mean, all this overview. I mean, wine. Look, wine brings out all these fun digressions.
Yes, they do. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, guys, for joining us. This is a really delicious Paul Prieur Sancerre.
Yes.
2019. We have it in the shop. Check it out, and you know,
check out our show and tell our friends about our show and our shop.
All right. Thanks so much, guys. See you next week. Bye. Take care.